Rationalizing the denominator. You cannot have a radical in the denominator. This first one can just be written as radical 56 over radical 45, but this radical 45 breaks the rules. You cannot have a radical in the denominator. So what you have to do is multiply the numerator and the denominator by the denominator. So what that does is when you multiply a square root times itself, it just becomes the whole number. Because if you take the square root of 45 times 45, well, you could take that pair of 45s out and it just becomes whole number 45 with nothing left inside. So we've got 45 in the denominator, and then in the numerator, we actually have to multiply this radical 56 times radical 45. Now, I don't want to multiply that, because it's going to give me a really large number. So I'm just going to do the factor tree of 46 and 45 and kind of combine them. So 46 is 8 times 7, 56 I mean. I think I said 46 twice, sorry. 4 times 2, 2 times 2. It's a 2, right? Let's make sure I can read my writing. 7. And then 45 is 9 times 5, and that's 3 times 3. So if I can combine all that, it would be 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 times 3 times 5 times 7. So the pairs that can come out are a pair of 2's and a pair of 3's. And what's left inside is 2 times 5 times 7. So simplify that, we get 6 radical 10 times 7 is 70. 6 radical 70. That was just the numerator, remember, all over that denominator of 45 that we had. So let's do the same thing for the next one. So we would need to simplify the fraction. This is actually not the answer. So we need to be careful. We need to simplify the fraction. So divide both of those by 3. We get 2 over 15. Keep the radical. So it's 2 radical 70 over 15 is the answer. Do not make the mistake I did. So in the next example, we have radical 108. We can't have that there. So we're going to multiply the top and bottom by 108. That was our first step that we came up with. When we do that, the denominator becomes whole number 108, and then I have to do some math with 5 radical 108. So now we actually need to take care of this radical 108 is not simplified. So I'm going to write that down here, radical 108. We do have the 5 already in front of it, so just don't forget about that. But we're just going to focus on the 108. So I know it's even, so I can start with 2 and 54. 54 is even, so that would be 2, and that's multiplied by 27. The 27 is 9 times 3, and the 9 is 3 times 3. So the pairs that I can take out of this, we've got 2, 2, 3, 3, 3. I can take a pair of 2's out and a pair of 3's out of the radical. But remember that 5 was already outside. That 5. So 5 times 2 times 3, and the remaining inside is 3. So I actually have to multiply it. So I would get 5 times 2 is 10 times 3 is 30. Radical 3 as my simplified radical for the numerator. Okay, so now we're still not done because now we need to simplify, ignore the radical and simplify the fraction. So 30 and 108, I know I can divide both of those by 3. So that would be 10 radical 3 over 36. So 30 divided by 3 is 10, 108 divided by 3 is 36. But now both of those are even, so I can still divide both of those by 2. So divide by 2, and I end up with 5 and 18. So my final answer is going to be 5 radical 3 over 18. Okay, and here's where things get a little bit more complicated. This is called the conjugate. When we have a binomial in the denominator, we need to multiply it by the opposite sign, 2 radical 2 minus 3. This results in a FOIL situation. But what we do to the bottom, we do to the top. This is where I'll lose most of you. So a reminder on FOIL, first, outer, inner, last. So first, 2 radical 2 times 2 radical 2. The outside numbers multiplies to get 4, and then it's radical 2 times 2, which is 4. I'll leave it like that for now. We'll get back to that. Okay, outer. So now I'm multiplying 2 radical 2 times negative 3. Well, the 2 and the negative 3 are whole numbers. So multiply that, you get negative 6 radical 2. Now the inner, 3 times 2 radical 2. Whole numbers, positive 6, and then the radical 2. And then last, that would be 3 times negative 3, which is negative 9. Now when you combine like terms here, these cancel. That's what we wanted because we need the radical to go away in the denominator. I see a radical right here, but what is the square root of 4? This square root of 4 is 2. 2 times 4 is 8. So really we have 8 minus 9 in the denominator, which becomes 1. So going up, back up to the top here, I have 1, and then it's 5 times 2 radical 2 minus 3. Well, that's distributive property. So I'm going to distribute the 5 to both of these. Well, 5 times 2 is 10 radical 2, and 5 times negative 3 is negative 15, all over 1. We don't need the all over 1, so I'll just leave it like that. So there's a lot happening there. So let's look at that again. So step 1, what we did is we multiply by the conjugate of 3 minus radical 6, which is 3 plus radical 6. The reason why we do that to the numerator and denominator is to get rid of the radical in the denominator. So let's do that first. That's FOIL. So we'll do that here. So first is 3 times 3, which is 9. Outer is 3 times radical 6, which is 3 radical 6. Inner is negative radical 6 times 3, which would be negative 3 radical 6. That's where they cancel. And last, negative radical 6 times radical 6 is negative. It's always going to be negative in that last one because we're doing a negative times a positive. Radical 6 times radical 6 is radical 36, but the square root of 36 is 6. So we really get 9 minus 6, which is 3. So the denominator is 3. And the numerator, we're going to have to FOIL again up here, actually. So let's do that. We would get first, which is 6. 2 times 3 is 6. Outer is 2 radical 6. Inner is 3 radical 5. And last is radical 30. And now we can simplify the radical 30. So I'm going to rewrite it down below. We have 6 plus 2 radical 6 is simplified, plus 3 radical 5 is simplified, but radical 30, remember, is like 6 times 5 if I do a factor tree, and then the 6 is 3 and 2. Oh, that is simplified. I'm sorry, that's radical 30. All over 3. That's our final answer.